Simply Financial with Christopher Calandra, Certified Financial Planner, is an innovative, comprehensive, informative, and cutting-edge podcast that discusses financial topics ranging from personal finance, economics, politics, and personal growth. Simply Financial will cover intriguing and thought-provoking questions so that the listener can simply increase their financial IQ.
Welcome to episode number 17 of season 3 of the Simply Financial podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Calandra. So on today's episode, I have with me Ronni Seifert Allen. I've known Ronni for, 7 or 8 years now, and for quite a while, I've asked her to come on the show because we've had some really interesting conversations about money and a particular aspect of money that will become more clear as the conversation unfolds. But Ronni is a wife, a mother, a working mom. She is your typical everyday mom who is seemingly everywhere at the same time, doing multiple things every day. So impressive. So Ronni, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just kind of jump in, and we could kind of build towards what I really wanted to talk to you about, because we've covered this, you and I, quite a bit in our conversations over the last couple of years. But if we could kind of go back a little bit to the beginning. You have 2 essentially college-age children, right? Your son will be heading off to college in September, and your daughter's already in college. So what did you learn about money when you were growing up?
Well, I think my parents were very conservative. They're both first-generation Americans, so I think the value of the dollar was put in the forefront to them as you need to save. My grandparents would always give us their pocket change and emphasize saving. So I think growing up, I always knew to save money, basically saved my pennies and then wrapped them. And so I think very conservative, and that was always instilled with me.
All right. And Ronni, what kind of household did you grow up in? Would you describe it as a wealthy household, poor, middle class, upper middle class? How would you characterize it?
I would say middle class. My parents were both the first generation to go to college, so education was always emphasized. But again, we were very conservative with money. We weren't very spendy about it.
All right, good. So what I had wanted to talk to you about, thanks for helping me kind of just tee up the conversation, is, you and your husband, like most Americans, are, I would describe, middle class, upper middle class, 2 working adults doing their best to raise their kids. Your husband is a small business owner. You've had some entrepreneurial experiences over the last bunch of years, as well as being an employee. But a couple of years ago, you inherited a pretty sizable amount of money. I mean, the purpose of this conversation, Ronni, is not to give out all kinds of nitty-gritty information, but let's just, if it's okay with you, describe it as a pretty sizable amount of money from your dad, who I know you were close with. So you have this tragic loss of a loved one, and there's everything that goes along with that mourning process. But what I wanted to talk to you about, and again, I'm appreciative that you came on because this is personal and in some ways a little sensitive, I think. But just from the money standpoint, what was that like to lose your father, a loved one? Granted, he was retirement age. I don't know, roughly how old was your dad when he passed?
Almost 80 years old.
Okay.
Yep.
And so what was it like for, let's just talk about you. Maybe we could talk about your husband a bit as we move along. But what was it like, given the circumstances, to then have this sizable inheritance for you and your husband and the kids to benefit from?
Well, I think, I was very respectful that he had worked very hard for that money and saved that money up all his life. so that he could be comfortable, after he stopped working and make his children comfortable. So I think what I've been very thoughtful about the money, I guess, is that
Sure.
I want to make sure that I use it for things that are not frivolous, like just going out and doing, things for the moment. I'm giving a lot of thought to the process. So my kids' college funds were the first thing that we thought of. We also redid our kitchen, which we had wanted to do for a while, so home improvement, and just being very thoughtful and intentional with the money and not blowing it. Yeah.
So can I'm sorry to cut you off. So can I ask you this?
No.
So in thinking about what to do with this money, was the thoughtfulness, the thinking that Dad would approve, like this is a good use of his money, his legacy, was that part of the decision-making for you and your husband, Tim?
Absolutely. What would he have done with the money? Always, growing up, and even once I became married, I didn't like to ask, for money from him. We never really discussed money as far as amounts, and so that wasn't anything I ever thought, I was going to be getting. Or so I think when I did get when everything happened, I made sure that I was honoring him and what he would have thought to do with the money.
So was this a weird process? I don't know if that's the right word, but, taking care of your son and daughter's college education, that seems to me, and let me take a step back. I've never received an inheritance. I'm blessed. Both my mom and dad are still alive, as are my in-laws. So I haven't gone through what you have gone through, both the good and the bad of it. So it seems like it might be a little weird where you're essentially spending your dad's money, and I might view that differently than if it was money that I earned or my wife Joelle earned. Was it a little weird?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, I never asked him or my mother for money. We always figured out how we were going to do things on our own. So I almost felt like this was money that wasn't mine coming in. So, I actually had my own business, decided to work for somebody else maybe 2 years after my dad passed away. So, I didn't change how I lived. If
Sure.
that's,
Right.
at all. I just live exactly the same way. I didn't decide I'm not going to go back to work, or I'm not going to. I also want to set a good example for my children so that going forward they understand that you still need to work for your own money, no matter how much you think you have. It could go away and for numerous amount of reasons, for health reasons or something that could happen. So I always try to emphasize that, just because there's a dollar amount doesn't mean it's infinite money.
So if somebody was in the shoes you were in, what was it, about 2 years ago, what advice would you give them about the timing of spending an inheritance? Now, listen, I think if it's a very small amount of money, let's just say as an example, you inherit, $5,000 or $10,000, that's a blessing. But I'm talking about if it was a sizable, impactful kind of money. And granted, we're not talking about, you inherit, a nation or anything like that. But if it's a sizable amount of money and you inherit it, would you give any guidance on when is it appropriate to begin to use and deploy that money? Because I think you and Tim decided not to do anything right away. I don't know if that was financially because you weren't sure what you were going to do, or if some of it was just because you were mourning and weren't ready to really deal with tackling how to use that money. Can you give us some thoughts on that and maybe some advice on how long you might want to wait, if at all, before deciding what to do if you inherit money from a loved one?
Sure. I think something that I've always been told is wait a year after mourning somebody to do anything that is life-changing. So not even money, but to even, get remarried or start dating or whatever the case may be after a loved one passes away, because I think there's a lot that your self goes through in that year period, and maybe even a little longer for some others. But I feel as if you have to give yourself time for that so you don't do something that you will regret later. And then I think the other advice I would say is take care of, needs that you have, like if you have outstanding bills that you need to take care of. And again, think about what you're doing with the money. Don't just, even somebody who's a lottery winner, even, same thing. I mean, you got to sort of come down from maybe the euphoria in that respect. And this is the same thing. You're going through a lot of feelings. They're not euphoric, but they're, you're going through, every day is a different day. You wake up, some days you're happy, some days you're sad. And so I think just giving yourself time to grieve and figure out, what is the best thing to do with that, to make for your family, so that your family is comfortable and that you are honoring the loved one who worked their whole life to give you that. And really, I think that's where their intentions were. And, hopefully I, too, will be intentional so that my kids can benefit as well from my hard work.
So that's a great answer. So in terms of your husband, Tim, you guys have been married for a long time.
25 years.
25 years? Seems like a long time. And, well, I don't know. That made it sound bad. I didn't mean it that way. But was Tim's views on this money and the spending and or investing and using of this money, what was his experience like? Was it different given that it wasn't his father, even though his father-in-law, your father, was part of his life for a very long time, given your long tenured marriage? How would he describe this experience?
That's a good question. I think that the two of us have both been intentional, and we've discussed what we want to do with the money. The kitchen was something important. And
but help me out with this, Ronni. Was he like, let's say there was a pot of money that you and he earned and built up together, and then there's the pot of money that you got from your inheritance. Was he, and I could be thinking about something that doesn't exist, so help me on this.
Right.
But I would think if it was me, I might be more apt on Joelle and our money, which is even silly, right? Because it is all your money once you inherit it. But the my money part, I might be more stronger in expressing my opinion to Joelle. Well, I think we ought to do this or not do this. And with the money that we inherited from, in this example, my in-law, I think I might tread a little lighter and be a little bit more reluctant to express my opinion, thinking that it was your father and you had experienced a greater loss than I had, and I might treat my conversation with my wife different because of the different source of the money. Maybe it wasn't like that, but can you help me?
I think it was really a non-issue. I think we had it, and we're just really living life exactly the same way.
Okay.
Yet we were able to.
You approached it like a team?
I think that's the way we approached it.
Okay. No,
yeah,
that's good.
I think that, we said we need to do the kitchen. That's something that we might not have been able to do beforehand because we actually had we ran into a lot of difficulties with the kitchen, so it cost a little bit more than we thought. So, and then also as far as college for our kids, we really our son is going to a school that's going to be more expensive than we might not have been able to send him before this to this school. So, we were able to just say apply to where you want to go, and we'll figure it out after.
Beautiful.
So I think those are the things that we didn't really discuss, like, here's the amount and this is what we're going to do. We just sort of, I think, have always lived similar to what we've always done, but we're able to now, give our kids that college experience that they want. And, we were able to give them both a car so they could drive back and forth to school, and my daughter has one up at school. Before that, they might have had to share a car, things like
that. Sure. Good. So as we kind of wrap up here a little bit, so now that it's a couple of years later, is there anything that we've talked about different than if I had discussed this with you when your father's death was more fresh and more recent? Have your thoughts on any of this evolved now that you have a little bit of perspective and gone through the process of losing your father, getting an inheritance, including real estate that's out of state, and figuring out how to use the money like college education for your son and daughter and the home improvement project? Anything you could think that you've kind of evolved in your thinking now that you've gone through it compared to if I spoke with you right after your father passed away?
Well, yeah, I think I wouldn't have known where I was at that point. There were a lot of paper things to take care of and emotions that were, raw. So I think, now I'm a little more level-headed, I think.
All right, good.
Yeah.
And so you gave some great advice earlier on with, it's a good idea to observe the 1-year rule, that take as much as a year to make sure that you're clear-headed, not making emotional decisions, that you have time to mourn and to heal before making decisions that might not be optimal and might even be premature. So any other advice you would give to someone who inherits a sizable or decent amount of money from a loved one? What advice would you give?
I think I covered most of it. Like I said, just really be intentional and thoughtful about what you do. And I would give that to a lottery winner as well. I mean,
sure.
Mine wasn't like that amount of money, but it just, I just think you need to think and not blow it and then later on say, I should have done this, or I should have, could have, would have,
Sure. No, and, we talk a lot on a podcast, and by virtue of my financial planning practice and background is intentional. We could also insert, have a plan. Don't blow the money. Don't have regrets later on that you would have, should have, could have. I think you even used that term earlier in our conversation today. And to be intentional, to have a plan so that you could benefit from the money today, to also take advantage of fulfilling other priorities that you have, to take advantage of other options that might be opened up with this newfound money, like you used the example with the 2 cars. So I think that's great advice, and it fits into what people generally should do about being intentional, have a plan with your money. You're much more likely then to make good decisions and to avoid mistakes and pitfalls. So that's great. I know this was kind of a personal subject, so Ronni, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and I think my listeners will get a lot out of listening to this episode. So thanks much.
Thank you.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of SagePoint Financial Incorporated and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note, the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of the information provided at these websites, nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues or any consequences arising out of your access to your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management, LLC, not affiliated with SagePoint Financial.
Simply Financial is part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can find Exvadio podcasts at exvadio.com/podcast, the Apple Podcasts app, iTunes Store, iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts. So join us and stay informed and entertained.